All right, so here's the third awesome sim I've come up with recently with regard to the 2017 ERM model. Somehow COSO decided it was time to revise the ERM model that had been around since about 2004, and the revision is being tested on the CPA exam starting in April of 2018. So let's hit it and let's see what we got to know. This third sim complements my other two that are on the website, cpaexamtutoring.com. In the BEC bundle package, you'll find in section 1 where the corporate governance is, you'll find the other two sims, you'll find this sim also. So, prioritizing risk as a basis for determining risk response is a principle underlining the performance component of ERM, performance being one of the new components of the 5 components of ERM. What are the 5 components of the new ERM model now? Can you rattle it off? Can you write it down? What are the 5 components? What are the 5 components of the new ERM model? That's the subject of my other sim, one of my other 2 sims on the new ERM model. But here's the 5, just so you know. Governance and culture is the first component of the new ERM model. Then strategy and objective setting, the second component, followed by performance. This sim is all about the performance component. And then the last 2 components of the new ERM model, review and revision and information communication and reporting. So here are the 5 components of the new 2017 ERM model: governance and culture, strategy and objective setting, performance, which is the topic of this sim, review and revision, information communication and reporting. So out of the 5 new components of the 2017 ERM model, this sim focuses in on just the performance component. And what we're going to do is, because the performance component is all about risk and risk assessment and responding to risk, you got to perform risk assessment, and then you have to prioritize the risk and respond to the risk. So that's what we're going to do in this sim. Prioritizing risk as a basis for determining response, that's a principle underlying the performance component of ERM. So for each numbered item, choose the correct response from list 1. An item from list 1 may be selected once, more than once, or not at all. And list 1 here, we're going to go over these, what they mean: risk acceptance, risk avoidance, risk pursuit, risk reduction, and risk sharing. Let's go over these before we start the sim. Risk acceptance, well, if you're a trucking company, you know that there's delays with traffic on the highways, and sometimes your trucks are going to be late, they're going to be stuck in traffic. That's just a risk that you have to accept, since that's the business that you chose to be in. There's just not a lot you can do about traffic jams, and you're in a trucking business. You're just going to have to accept that risk if you want to be in that business. What's an example of risk avoidance? Well, if your business model is rapidly deteriorating because people used to come to your stores all the time to buy toys, but now everybody seems to be buying toys online, you probably aren't going to want to open up any new toy stores. See Toys R Us for more details, right? That's risk avoidance, getting out of that business and avoid that risk. All right, what's risk pursuit? Why would you pursue a risk? Well, you would only pursue a risk if you thought there was tremendous value associated with pursuing that risk. And that's what this new ERM model is all about. It's about the relationship between risk and value. So you would pursue a risk if you thought there was a tremendous amount of value after that risk. For example, you have a chance to raise capital by either selling bonds or selling stock. You got stockholders lined up to buy your stock, and it's less risky for you if you take on new stockholders because they don't have to get a return, they don't have to get a dividend from you. But if you decide to forego the equity capital that's waiting there for you and you choose to raise debt capital, you're pursuing a risk because the bondholders have to get their interest, otherwise you're looking at bankruptcy. You miss an interest payment, you could be out of business. So you would only pursue that risk if you thought that your sales were going to really take off from here. And once you handled that interest cost, you could keep all the remainder for yourself on the incremental sales increases because you don't have any new stockholders. You don't want to split it with any new owners. Then you would pursue the risk of taking on additional debt, even though there is that risk that you won't have enough to pay the interest. So risk pursuit only when there's an upside of value anticipated. All right, let's talk about risk reduction. Reducing risk. Well, if you're an importer and you're buying from a vendor and the contract is denominated in euros, you got to come up with euros in 90 days to pay the vendor. What's your risk? Your risk is that the price of the euro increases relative to the price of the dollar. So then you could reduce that risk by hedging and entering into a contract to buy the euro today, because your risk is that the euro increases. And if you buy it today, then if the euro increases, your hedged investment would increase in value too. And you would take the profit from that hedged investment and you would offset the loss with the vendor. That's how you would reduce risk, by hedging. Other ways to reduce risk include, depending on what the risk is, if your risk is not foreign currency risk, but maybe risk of theft, then you could put in cameras, security cameras, or put in alarm systems. All right, what about risk sharing? Sharing the risk, transferring the risk. Transfer the risk to the insurance company maybe for a premium. Depending on what your risk is, you might want to transfer or share that risk with the insurance company. So now that we know what our risk responses are from list 1, we're going to choose one of these 5, either risk acceptance, avoidance, pursuit, reduction, or sharing. This is how the exam is likely to test the performance component of the 2017 ERM model. We said that performance is one of the 5 components of the new model. There's the other components too: governance and culture, strategy and objective setting, review and revision, information communication, and reporting. All right, let's tear into the sim now. Number 1, Hollywood Video had been successful as a movie rental dealer for decades. Maybe you had an account there. You used to pick up your movie on Friday night, bring it back on Monday. By 2010, streaming movies online was becoming more convenient and cheaper for customers. So the entity determined that it was very likely that their business model was rapidly becoming outdated as the competition from streaming was cutting deeper into their profit margins every month with no end in sight. According to the 2017 ERM model, what should Hollywood Video do to respond to this risk? Are they going to accept it? No, that would be nuts. Because if the business model is rapidly deteriorating, you don't want to accept that risk, you want to avoid that risk. Let's go with risk avoidance. So what would they do? They would try to avoid the risk, which means they would have to clear out of that business, which is what they did. After determining that they would be unable to mitigate the risk to their business objectives, they would have to avoid that risk by exiting that line of business. That would be the most likely response to an outdated business model, because if you have an outdated business model and you see that it's highly likely that your business model is becoming outdated, and if it does become outdated, it's going to have a severe consequence, highly likely and severe, the answer would be you better avoid that risk. So hop out of that business and maybe get into something else. So risk avoidance would be the answer. Certainly not risk acceptance, not risk pursuit. We're not going to pursue that risk by opening up more stores. There's no way to reduce the risk of an outdated business model or transfer the risk. I don't think the insurance company is going to be too interested in your outdated business model for a premium. So avoiding the risk is unfortunately what these video stores had to do. All right, let's try this one. The Adams Corp, a U.S. firm, imports and exports goods, and the contracts are often denominated in foreign currencies. So you have currency risk. Adams Corp considers it very likely that the currency rate will change from the date the contract is entered into to the date of settlement. So it's likely to happen, but Adams Corp considers the severity of the risk low because any one transaction would not result in a catastrophic loss to Adams Corp. So it's not a severe situation. They don't have to avoid the risk entirely of entering into foreign currency transactions. According to the 2017 ERM model, the likely risk response would be risk reduction. Sure, they're going to want to hedge that risk and reduce it as much as possible. So they'll reduce the risk. They'll probably hedge it by using options. They'll either purchase call options when importing, or they'll purchase put options when selling, when being the seller. They'll purchase the put options. See, what they want to do is take out the risk of the currency either going up. If the foreign currency goes up, that'd be bad news when they're importing. If the foreign currency goes down, that'll be bad news when they're exporting. And the best way to take that risk out, reduce it, is by hedging. By futures, forward contracts, options. All right, number 3. The owners of the local indoor skate and bike park are thrill seekers by nature. What is that telling you? It means they have a high risk appetite, right? They're thrill seekers by nature. While insurance against injury is cost prohibitive, they tell us, the owners have a passion for the sport, often judging in-house tournaments. Helmets must be worn, and customers must sign a waiver each time they enter. Therefore, risk of lawsuit is considered low. According to the 2017 ERM model, what should the response be to the risk of lawsuit? And the answer would be risk acceptance, because they have a high risk appetite. And how do you know they have a high risk appetite? It says they're thrill seekers by nature. And you would picture that the owners of an indoor skate and bike park might be thrill seekers by nature. It certainly tells us that they are, in which case they're going to accept this risk. Since they have a high risk appetite, they have a passion for the sport, they're thrill seekers by nature, their response is going to be to accept the risk since insurance is not an option. It's considered cost prohibitive, they tell us, and this is the business that these guys chose to be in, so they're going to have to accept this risk. All right, let's compare number 4, the owners of the indoor bounce park, to the owners of the skate and bike park. Okay, number 4, the indoor bounce park operates a facility with trampolines and ropes courses. All patrons sign waivers and must watch a safety video before they can participate. The current operators have no passion for the sport. It's a business for them, but it's profitable. Risk of lawsuit is considered low, but could have a severe impact. According to the 2017 ERM model, what should the response be to the risk? Well, this time it doesn't tell us that insurance is cost prohibitive, so you would try to get insurance and transfer that risk sharing or risk transfer, same thing. So if they have a low risk appetite, they're going to want to make sure they at least get that insurance, especially when the risk would be a severe impact. So insurance will be the proper way to mitigate this risk. And if they really want to be careful, they can buy down the deductible to make sure to limit their losses. But they might be satisfied with just a certain deductible, just to know they're covered for anything catastrophic. So let's notice the difference between number 4 and number 3. When there's a low risk appetite, like in number 4, they don't have a passion for the sport, right? They don't care about bouncing on a trampoline, the owners here. They just want to bounce over to the bank and make deposits. So they're only interested in the business impact. So they would not simply accept this risk. They want to actually transfer this risk. Whereas in number 3, with the skate and bike park, they couldn't get insurance, but they love the sport. So they have a high risk appetite. They're thrill seekers by nature. They love watching kids do jumps, I guess, and flips. So they're going to accept that risk in number 3 because of the high risk appetite. See the difference? If you have a high risk appetite, you can accept more risk. In number 4, they don't have a high risk appetite. It's just a business for them. So they will have to either transfer that risk, share it, or they'll probably choose to avoid it if they couldn't get insurance. All right, number 5. Boardwalk Skillo is a seasonal business on the Jersey Shore. It's open only from May through August. It would take several rainy weekends to impact the short window of business, and that much bad weather is considered unlikely, although even one bad summer of business would not severely impact the company. The owners are second generation and enjoy a large social status within the local community. According to the 2017 ERM model, what should the response be to the risk of having a bad season and people don't come down to the shore because of bad weather? What should they do? Well, it seems like they're second generation owners. They like the social status of owning this place within the local community. Everybody knows who they are. Looks like they're going to accept the risk because it seems like they have a high risk appetite. And frequency of the risk was considered low, severity was low, so they'll accept that risk. They chose to be in a seasonal business, so the risk of bad weather is going to hurt a seasonal business, but they got to accept that if they want to be who they are in the marketplace and in the community. So we're going to go with risk acceptance there. Let's go to 6. Number 6, a company with a low risk appetite sells jewelry and bridal accessories. So that means they don't really want to take on a lot of risk. This is just a business for them. They're in an area of the city where theft is considered frequent. Since they have several stores, any one theft would not have severe consequences. According to the 2017 ERM model, what should the response be to the risk? Well, the risk of theft, you should try to reduce that risk by putting in some cameras, maybe locks on the showcases. Let's go with risk reduction. In a low risk appetite environment, if frequency is considered high but severity is low, reduce the risk by installing cameras or lock the showcases on the more valuable items. That's going to be your risk response, risk reduction. Number 7, management of a hedge fund seeks to amplify returns on invested capital by seeking out highly speculative investments that have the potential to produce the highest return. Management understands the nature and extent of the risks required to achieve desired performance. According to the 2017 ERM model, what should the response be to the risk? This sounds like risk pursuit. See, with risk pursuit, you're taking action that accepts increased risk in order to achieve value. You want a desired amount of value. This action is appropriate when management understands the nature and extent of the risk and they're just seeking out the highest possible returns. That's risk pursuit. All right, number 8, the Christmas shop is open all year, but does 60% of its business in the last 2 months of the year. Well, it's the Christmas shop, so they're going to do their business in November and December. Well, this past year, Christmas shop experienced inventory shortages because they limited their buying due to the 2 prior year sales being weaker than anticipated. They weren't going to get burned again. They didn't buy as much for this. Well, guess what? They wound up with shortages, stockouts. People came in, they didn't have items. They lost sales. According to the 2017 ERM model, what will be the most appropriate risk response going forward to manage the risk of inventory stockouts? So this time the risk is not theft, but inventory stockouts. So here, what you would want to do is take some steps to reduce the risk. Maybe to install some inventory technology to more closely monitor your inventory levels. That might help you avoid the risk of stockouts since the frequency of risk is high. Number 9, a company in need of capital. They choose to issue only debt capital instead of equity to finance future plans. Choosing only debt is increasing the risk, right? What's the risk there? The risk is that if they can't pay the interest, they're going to be bankrupt. The entity already has bonds outstanding, but the owners desire to maximize total return by limiting the number of shareholders, so they don't want to issue more stock. The company would have no problem attracting investors if they wanted to issue stock. So the stockholders are there. They'll buy more stock. But the company says, no, we're going to issue debt. Now, the 2017 ERM model would refer to this as risk pursuit because you're taking on additional risk because you think there's value associated with that risk. They're seeking out the risk because there is a conscious effort to maximize returns. We know once the interest is paid, if you don't have any more stockholders, then all the additional revenue goes right to the owners. Because bondholders don't share in future earnings. They only get their interest, and that's all. So this is an example of risk pursuit as a risk response. Number 10, Lucentos is a busy restaurant in high demand as their chef recently won a prestigious award. Instead of expanding its capacity by leasing the adjacent facility or opening a second location to accommodate growing demand, the owners take no action and are content with the daily volume from their sole facility, although wait times for tables are getting longer. The 2017 ERM model refers to this as, well, if they take no action, then they're accepting the risk. It says a couple of interesting things here. It says they could lease the adjacent facility. So all they got to do is break through the wall adjacent to their place, and there's another space right there. They don't want to do that. They could open a second location. They don't want to do that. They're taking no action. They're content with the daily volume, although wait times for tables are getting longer, and there's a risk that customers are going to start getting annoyed and they're not going to want to come because it's too long a wait. So a risk acceptance is when the company takes no action. That is a potential response and just accepting the risk. Hey, it's Darius. Get my CPA exam BEC video bundle at cpaexamtutoring.com.